I was going to give a bit of background on this game, but all you really need to know is that it's called the Game of the Century. It was played by a 13-year-old Bobby Fischer, which is what makes it so impressive, against his first like really tough opponent, a guy called Donald Byrne, basically a really strong US chess player at the time. He won. He went on to win the US championships, and he played for the US multiple times. So a really tough opponent. But let's just dive straight into the game because it is a fantastic game. Those pictures you can see on the side are actual pictures taken from the game. But yeah, let's go. Let's dive in. So Donald's playing the white pieces and Bobby is playing the black pieces. So first move by Donald, knight f3. It's a pretty non-committal move. The game can transpose into a number of things from here, so it's pretty nice way to start. Bobby follows suit with knight f6. All the opening stuff is very much by the book for the first sort of 10 moves. Even like 50 years ago, people were, even before like computers, people were still playing really good by the book moves, but it does deviate eventually. So c4, taking control of the center. g6, he's going to fianchetto his bishop. Knight c3, just standard stuff, developing pieces. Bishop g7, and d4, getting more control of the center. Bobby castles, bishop f4. You want to get your bishop outside this pawn chain. You probably want to play e3 at some point, and you don't want to play that if your bishop's stuck, so it's good to play it after you've got your bishop out. d5, so Bobby starts to challenge the center now, and Donald plays queen b3. So he's expecting to capture back if Bobby decides to take the pawn, and in fact he does. So Bobby takes the pawn, the queen captures back, and Bobby has given up like a lot of the control on the center, but he's drawn Donald's queen out to a pretty rogue square. Like, the queen doesn't really want to be out this far this early on move 7, so let's see how he's going to attack this. c6 takes away these squares from the white knight, and e4. So Donald's got a really good position. Like, he's controlling all these squares with his pawns. He's got his knight on a great square. His bishop's looking good. He just needs to play bishop e2 and chuck in a castle, and he's going to have a lovely game. But let's see what happens. So in this position, which has been reached many times since they played it, the modern way to continue is to play b5 and then queen a5. But Bobby's not a modern kind of guy, so he's gonna play in a slightly different way. Slightly slower move, knight to d7. So it is a bit slower, but there's nothing wrong with it. And even the queen being out here, it's not necessarily a big problem. So rook d1, putting a rook on the same file as a queen, usually a good idea. In case these pieces move, you might have some nice tricks. And knight b6. And now you can see that Bobby's he's manoeuvred his knight from here to here, and he has taken 2 moves, but like he's really only taken 1 move because the second move comes with an attack on the queen. So like, it's called moving a piece with tempo, and like it's when a piece of less value attacks a piece of more value. So the piece that's more valuable has got to move, otherwise it's just going to get taken. So you basically force white to make a move they wouldn't otherwise have made. Best move is really just to go back, and the reason he probably didn't do this is because he's worried about the bishop coming to e6, developing another piece with tempo, and then the queen can just hide away here. So he decided to play queen c5, and the queen's a bit of a Mary Sue. Like, she doesn't like to be on the front lines. She should really wait until later in the game to come out into the attack. But Donald didn't like this bishop e6 idea, so he's decided to put his queen on c5. But again, it's very much not a losing position. Bishop g4, developing a piece, just good stuff. And this is where the first sort of inaccuracy comes in. Like, as I said before, Donald should have just continued this game by putting his bishop here and castling, and he would have had a nice little game. He's worried about the knight coming back here and then the pawn being pushed to e5, undermining the center. But as in life, you can't have everything. So he should have really just gone for a little bishop and a castle. But he didn't. He played bishop g4. So he's committed a couple of opening faux pas. He's moved the same piece twice, and he's put his queen very far into the position. And let's see how Bobby just completely takes this apart. It's only the computer only rates it as an inaccuracy. It's not necessarily a mistake, but even a small inaccuracy against a good player can be very punished. So Bobby plays knight a4. And it's a bit of a weird move, because if you were playing against one of your mates and they did this, you just say, "Ha, you're an idiot. I'm going to take your knight. You just gave me a free knight." But it's not even a free knight. Like, I'll show you what happens if you take the knight. So, take the knight. Problem is, that knight was the only defender of that pawn. So, you're going to win the pawn, but you might be saying, well, I'm going to take the pawn back. Yes, your queen and your bishop are under attack, but white's got this bishop captures on e7 move. And yeah, your queen's still under attack, but you're threatening the black queen. So you've won your pawn back, and after a queen trade, the reason it wasn't a knight sacrifice is that now Bobby's got this knight captures move. So yeah, it did start with him giving up a knight, but it's actually going to end with him getting the knight back. Oh, hello. Where have we gone? Sorry about that. And yeah, there we go. So he's got the knight back. And now, like, after you retreat the bishop, what black can just take the knight, mess up your pawn structure, and in fact will just win a pawn. And you've got this horrible endgame where white hasn't developed his pieces, his king's in the centre, the rooks are going to come out here, this piece is under pressure, Bobby's just going to win this, so you can't take the knight. So Donald plays the best move, which is queen back, but it runs into a similar issue, which is that Bobby can just take the knight, and after you recapture, yeah, you've given white this sort of strong centre, but you're actually just going to pick up one of these pawns. And the best move here is actually just to admit you've made a mistake and just move this bishop back, and then continue by playing bishop here and castling. It's a really big problem that your king's in the middle of the board. But, you know, you're a 30, 40-something Donald Byrne. You're an absolute master. Some plucky young kids, you know, playing you. He's just offered you a knight, which you had to decline. You're not going to admit you made a mistake. So he continues with bishop takes on e7. And you might be thinking, well, why would you not do that? Like, you're threatening to take the queen. You're threatening to take a rook. And after the queen moves away, you might be wondering, okay, rooks are better than bishops. Can I just take the rook? So let's see what happens if you take the rook. So if you take the rook, black's going to recapture with the bishop, which is nice because it comes with an attack on the queen, so that's sort of like a free move. And after the queen moves, you've got this very nice rook e8 move. And again, if the king was castled, then black would probably be at least like even here. But like black's just so far ahead because even if you swap queens, there's just no way to stop all these horrible discovered checks. The problem is if you move the knight, the rook puts you in check. So you might, like, the king can't move out of it because the knight stops the king moving to that square. And if you try and block it with bishop e2, you just run into knight takes here, and then your bishop's going to drop. You're going to win the rook back in the very least. So best move is actually to play bishop d3, but even then you run into knight captures here with check, and you're going to win your rook back, and you're going to go into this endgame where, again, you can absolutely mess up white's pawn structure. You can bring your bishop into the game with check. Not something you want to go into. So capturing the rook, not a good idea. So Donald plays a good move, developing his bishop. He's really hoping to castle. Puts his bishop on a good square, and he says to Bobby, what are you going to do? So again, Bobby plays a pretty brilliant move. He loves offering his knights in this game, so he's going to take a pawn and offer another knight. Now, again, you might be thinking, well, he's given me a free knight again. But actually, he's not giving you a free knight. In fact, he's just won a pawn. Because if you take the knight, black's got this great rook to e8 move. The bishop's pinned. It can't move, otherwise the king will be in check. So that's an illegal move. And even if you try defending the bishop by putting the queen here, the black queen can just attack the bishop a second time and you're going to lose the bishop. So again, not something you want to go into. So instead, you can't take the knight. You just have to accept you've lost another pawn. And he plays bishop back here, which again seems like a pretty reasonable move. Like, you're threatening to take the queen and the knight now, and the knight doesn't really have time to capture the rook, otherwise you'll lose your queen. And actually, a load of masters like observed this game and said, yeah, black's lost in this position. Before we get to the amazing move, Bobby gets this nice little in-between move in where he checks the king, and now the king's just never going to castle. He has to go to the side. And this is the why the game is called the game of the century. And this is very much the move of the century. You're Bobby Fischer here, 13 years old. You're playing some bloke who's absolute master. Your queen's under attack. Your knight's under attack. What are you going to play? Well, he just says, well, I may as well put another piece under attack. So let's go to bishop e6. So this is the real critical position. So you've got a few candidate moves here. You could take the bishop. You could take the queen. Seems like an obvious move. Or you could take the knight. Let's say for a minute that you believe Bobby and you say, okay, if I take your queen, you must have something bad planned for me. So let's try taking the bishop. See if that works. Unfortunately, this runs into a forced checkmate. So first thing you're going to do as Mr. Bobby Fischer is you're going to get your queen out from danger with check. And if the king comes here, then you're just going to deliver checkmate by moving your queen here. It's defended by the knight, so not something you want to do. So king's got to go to g1. You now bring your knight into check again. King's got to go back, no other move. And now you get this lovely double check with knight to g3. The three ways to get out of check, by the way, are to capture, to block, or to move. But if you're being checked by two pieces, you can't capture and you can't block. So you got to move. If you go there, you get checkmated. So best move is king to g1. And now it'd be nice if the king didn't have this escape square, because then we could go knight here and checkmate him. So the way we're going to do this is a pretty sneaky maneuver. We're going to go queen here. The only move is to capture the queen with the rook. And now you might think, oh, look how protected the king is. But he's not. He's too protected, if anything, because now we get oh, that's not what we want. We want knight here. And this is called a smothered checkmate, because the king's just completely surrounded. He's got nowhere to go. And he's just completely... he's done for. So let's go back. Capturing the bishop, bad. I'm going to lose. The engine's recommendation is to capture the knight. So let's see what happens if you capture the knight. Problem with capturing the knight is that this pawn is pinned, because if you move it, your queen will die to the bishop. So we're going to exploit that by taking the bishop. And now the pawn can't really recapture, otherwise we'll lose the queen. But in fact, that is the best move. So we're just going to have a nice queen trade. And now if you move this bishop, you're going to lose this pawn. So you may as well also trade the bishops. And again, we go into this endgame where black's a pawn up, white's horrifically underdeveloped. You're just having a bad time. You're going to have to try and get your king. Oh, it went a bit mad with the arrows, but you're going to try and have to get your king here, bring the rook into the game. But in the meantime, black's going to double his rooks, and it's going to be easily winning for Bobby. So, only one move left. And Donald played it. He said, well, you're 13. I'm an absolute legend at chess. I'm going to take your queen. So he takes your queen, and now Bobby's got to figure out how he's going to win. So first thing that looks pretty good is, well, we can take a piece for free with check. So why don't we take the bishop, check the king. King can't go here now because of the rook. Rook's blocking that square. So the king's got to go to g1. And now we get a lovely bit of windmill action here. So what's going to happen is the knight's just going to keep coming in and out and absolutely messing with the white king. So the knight comes into check. The only move is to play king here. And now, again, if we move this knight, we get loads of lovely discoveries against the king. So may as well pick up the pawn. King goes back. Knight goes back in. King goes back. And now we're going to put our knight onto a nicer square. So we're going to put our knight here with check on the king. And we're threatening to take the rook. And we're also threatening to take the bishop. And obviously the king's got to get out of check. So what are we going to do here? Take the rook or the bishop? Well, rooks are better than bishops, but the key thing about taking the bishop is that it reveals an attack on the queen. So we can take the bishop for free, essentially, and again, white's got to do something about the fact that his queen's under threat. So best move is to play queen here, attacking the bishop, but Bobby plays the best reply, which is to play rook to a4, and we get this lovely little trio where the bishop defends the knight defends the rook, and the rook defends the bishop. So the queen literally can't do anything. So all you can do really is just take the pawn, and now, well, you've got a free rook. Why would you not take it? So Bobby takes the rook, and now suddenly, like, Bobby's got two bishops and a rook for the queen, which is more than enough compensation. This is the saddest rook to ever be on the chessboard. It's literally done nothing. It's like Bobby just had an extra rook, because this rook's been absolutely pitiful. I know the next couple of moves, white's going to try and get this rook into the game because it's the best thing he can do. But unfortunately, that's going to drop a few pawns. So he plays h3, trying to get his king here so he can bring the rook in. But just rook picks up the pawn. And then when the king leaves this square, there's nothing else defending this pawn. So we get another pawn. And finally, the rook gets into the game. But Bobby says, well, I've got so much material, I can just swap. So he takes the rook. And Donald gets this nice in-between move in where he tries to get his queen to a better square, but Bobby can just block with the bishop, and now finally Donald recaptures the rook that just took his rook. And now, okay, Bobby's got a massive material advantage, but he's just going to put all his pieces on great squares and say to the white queen, well, what are you going to do? So, bishop f3. Pawn defends the bishop, bishop defends the pawn. Good stuff. Knight f3, just trying to get your knight to a better square. And this is a nice little octo knight. He's hitting all 8 squares, middle of the board, defended by the bishop. Lovely stuff. Bishop b8, going after the pawn. Bobby says, nope, I'm going to push my pawn forward. And yeah, I did go a bit crazy with the arrows, but you can see everything's defended. Like, the bishop defends the pawn, the rook and the knight. The pawn defends the bishop and the other pawn. The king's getting everything in the corner, and the white queen just can't do anything. So it's lovely stuff from Bobby. Donald plays h4. He's trying to push his pawns, try and undermine the king's position, but Bobby's having none of it. He just says h5. No more progress to be made there. Knight e5, trying to get your knight to a better square. And Bobby finally unpins the bishop from the king. And now the problem is that, like, the bishop can come to this lovely diagonal where it just hammers like all of Donald's pieces. So Donald's saying, well, okay, I'm going to get my king off the diagonal, go to g1. But Bobby says, nah, no you're not. I'm going to check you. If you go here, I'm going to deliver checkmate by playing rook a1. And if you go back, then I'm just going to put my bishop back here and at the very least just win another piece. So pretty stubbornly, Donald says, well, I'm not going to do either of those things. I'm going to play king f1. But problem with king f1 is you're just getting checkmated. The rook just covers all the squares you could go forward on, and as you see, the bishop covers the square behind the king. So if you just check him somehow, which you can do with the knight, the king's got to move over, and now check him with the bishop again. King's got to move over. Keep throwing in some checks. The king keeps moving over, and finally you bring the knight in and you deliver a lovely checkmate with all your pieces getting involved. So yeah, Donald got pretty smashed in that game, and it's pretty amazing how it originated from this bishop g5 move, just like only an inaccuracy really, but Bobby played it out accurately. And as you saw, there were ways to get into endgames where like Donald was only a pawn down, but even then they were still winning for Bobby. And even to add insult to injury, after the game, a reporter asked Bobby like how he pulled off such a brilliancy against this master, and he just said, "Oh, I just played what I thought was good, and I guess I got lucky." So a bit of a slap in the face for Donald Byrne, but there you have it. But yeah, I think I'm gonna call it there for today. if you enjoyed it, then you can follow the channel with the little follow button. I think you might have to have a Twitch account, but you can follow the channel, and it'll tell you when people are streaming again. If you have any feedback, feel free to just let me know. If you have any fun games, then chuck them my way, and I might analyse them next week. I should be back next week doing another one of these. But yeah, until then, I hope you enjoyed, and I shall see you guys soon.